One you smoke.
Guns N' Roses, Metallica, Ozzy Osbourne. These were the biggest bands on the planet, and in 1992, they all wanted one band to join them on tour, Nirvana. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to seal their place in rock history. So what did Nirvana do? Nirvana did the unthinkable. Nirvana truly changed the landscape of rock music in the late 80s and early 90s. They weren't merely involved in the scene, they played a crucial role in shaping the grunge movement as we know it today. In 1991, everything changed when their album Nevermind hit the airwaves, launching them into superstardom overnight. They were everywhere, on mainstream radio and all over MTV, making it nearly impossible to avoid hearing about them. But this is where the story takes a turn. Back then, big-name bands were lining up to get Nirvana as their opening act. Sounds like a dream gig, right? But they said no. They turned down some of the biggest names in music. So let's get into the 6 bands Nirvana refused to tour with and the stories behind why. Alright. Coming in at number 6 is a band that truly defined the 80s vibe of excess and massive shows, Guns N' Roses. Often regarded as the biggest rock band on the planet at the time, their debut album, Appetite for Destruction, remains one of the highest-selling debut albums of all time. But by 1992, the musical landscape was shifting. As the grunge movement began to take over, Axl Rose, living the ultimate rock star life, had a daring idea. At the absolute height of Guns N' Roses' fame, he wanted Nirvana to be the opening act for their stadium tour with Metallica. People were calling this tour a big deal, maybe one of the most hyped rock shows ever. For any emerging band, this would have been a monumental opportunity to play in front of enormous crowds alongside 2 of rock's reigning titans. This wasn't Axl's first attempt to bring the bands together. He had previously asked Kurt Cobain if Nirvana would play at his birthday party, an offer that was also turned down. When that didn't work out, he made the bigger play with the tour. According to Metallica's Kirk Hammett, who was tasked with making the call, Axl was persistent. Kurt Cobain's response, however, was crystal clear. Absolutely not. Hammett recalled the conversation. He just went on and on about how he just didn't like what Guns N' Roses stood for. In a 1992 Guitar World interview, Kurt elaborated on his stance. Axl Rose kept calling me, asking me to go on tour with them. I just didn't want to be a part of their corporate rock world. I felt like it was the opposite of everything I was trying to do with Nirvana.
Hi, Axl. Hi, Axl. Where's Axl? Hi, Axl. Hi, Axl. Hi, Axl.
Hammett tried to talk him into it, saying, just go out there, represent Nirvana, play the show, and that's it. But Kurt wouldn't change his mind. The rejection wasn't just about musical differences, it was a clash of values. Kurt had been vocal about his disdain for what he considered Guns N' Roses' problematic behavior. He criticized Axl for treating fans poorly, showing up late to shows, and promoting what he called wrong values like sexism and the way they do drugs. Axl did not take the rejection well. After being turned down twice, he lashed out publicly in Metallica's magazine, launching harsh personal attacks against Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love. He called them junkies and made cruel comments about their newborn daughter. This animosity would eventually boil over at the 1992 MTV Video Music Awards, where the tensions exploded in a very public confrontation.
Is someone like Kurt Cobain in Nirvana, who basically is a f***ing junkie with a junkie wife. And if the baby's born deformed, I think they both ought to go to prison. That's my feeling.
Kurt's gut feeling proved to be spot on. The Guns N' Roses and Metallica tour became notorious for all the wrong reasons. The tour was plagued by Axl's erratic stage behavior, frequent late starts, and subsequent audience walkouts. Disaster struck when a pyrotechnics mishap left James Hetfield with serious burns. In the end, Faith No More, not Nirvana, took the opening slot. But they too faced their own set of challenges with Guns N' Roses throughout the tour. Kurt's instincts were right. The Guns N' Roses and Metallica tour got famous for the wrong reasons. Axl showed up late, acted wild on stage, and crowds walked out. A pyrotechnics accident badly burned James Hetfield. Nirvana didn't open, Faith No More did, but they too faced their own set of challenges with Guns N' Roses throughout the tour.
Things started going wrong about halfway through Metallica's set when a stage prop exploded, inflicting second-degree burns on James Hetfield's arms and legs. The band was forced to terminate its set, promising the crowd it would return to play a makeup show.
Coming in at number 5 is another rejection that left rock fans stunned worldwide. Back in 1991, when Nirvana was still riding the wave of Nevermind's unexpected success, they received an offer that would have seemed like a dream come true to most bands. The chance to tour with heavy metal legend Ozzy Osbourne. But Kurt Cobain and company had different ideas about their future. The story begins at a Los Angeles recording studio where both artists were working on their respective albums. Ozzy was mixing his new record at the same studio where Nirvana had recorded Nevermind. However, their encounters weren't exactly rock star meet and greets. As Kurt later described, there were a few times where we were coming towards each other and I had to move up against the wall and wait for him to stumble past me because he was so messed up. Despite his condition at the time, Ozzy was clearly paying attention to Nirvana. The Prince of Darkness had become a fan of the Seattle trio, impressed by a fresh sound that reminded him of his Black Sabbath days. Ozzy himself reached out to Nirvana to open for him. This wasn't just any gig, it was part of Ozzy's No More Tours farewell shows. He had been misdiagnosed with multiple sclerosis and believed he was hanging up his boots for good. For most bands, especially one just breaking into the mainstream, this would have been an incredible opportunity to play massive arenas for huge crowds. The offer came at the perfect time for Ozzy, but the wrong time for Nirvana. Kurt had genuine respect for the metal icon, telling interviewer Gilbert Blechen, "I can understand Ozzy liking us because we have at least some similarities with his former band. Sure, I respect the man. I have always loved his music, except for his last 5 albums or whatever." But respect wasn't enough. Nirvana turned down the offer without hesitation. Kurt's reasoning was simple. It would have been fun and kind of exciting to be part of his last shows, but we don't really want to play in huge arenas supporting someone. This wasn't about disliking Ozzy personally. It was about Nirvana's philosophy. Kurt explained that while it might have been exciting, playing as a support act in such big arenas would definitely have not been right for us. By this point, Nirvana was acutely aware of its own power and refused to ride anyone else's coattails, even a legend like Ozzy's. At number 4, we have Metallica, a band that famously invited Nirvana to be the opening act for their chaotic 1992 co-headlining tour with Guns N' Roses. Interestingly, we are listing Metallica as a separate band that Nirvana chose not to tour with, despite the invitation. Metallica's guitarist Kirk Hammett personally called Kurt Cobain to extend the offer, but Cobain ultimately rejected it. The decision wasn't personal against Metallica. Rather, Cobain took issue with the public persona and perceived attitude of Guns N' Roses, particularly its frontman, Axl Rose. The rejection was a matter of principle for Kurt. By 1992, Nirvana's album Nevermind had exploded, hitting number 1 on the Billboard charts and making them one of the most sought-after bands in the world. Having observed Guns N' Roses' behavior over the years, Cobain felt they represented everything he opposed in rock music: the ego, the excess, and what he viewed as their problematic attitudes. As we mentioned before, Cobain openly criticized Guns N' Roses for how they treated their fans and their views on social issues. Since we've already covered the full story in the first section, let's not drag it out. Moving on to the next group, Nirvana declined to tour with the legendary Canadian band Rush. Rush wanted Nirvana to open their massive tour across North America and Europe. On paper, it was an odd match. Rush were promoting their 14th studio album, Roll the Bones, which had climbed to number 3 on the US album chart. They were at a peak, selling out arenas with their technically dazzling progressive rock. Meanwhile, Nirvana were riding the wave of Nevermind, bringing raw, emotional grunge to the masses. From a business standpoint, the timing was perfect. Rush needed a hot opening act to help pack their arenas, and Nirvana were the hottest band in America. The pairing would have introduced Cobain's music to a different audience. However, when the offer from Rush arrived, Kurt Cobain didn't hesitate to turn it down. During a 1991 interview with Gilbert Blechen, Cobain casually mentioned Rush, Skid Row, and a bunch of others also asked us to tour, but he clearly had no interest in supporting. Cobain's reasoning was consistent with his other rejections. "We don't really want to play in huge arenas supporting someone," he explained. This stance wasn't about disrespecting Rush personally. It was about Nirvana's core philosophy. They had already proven they could sell out smaller venues on their own terms, and Kurt was unwilling to compromise that vision. While the band as a whole said no, the decision was likely a tough pill to swallow for Dave Grohl. He was a huge Rush fan, particularly of their legendary drummer, Neil Peart. Years later, Grohl paid tribute to Peart, calling him an inspiration, who spawned generations of musicians like myself to pick up two sticks and chase a dream. For Grohl, touring with Rush would have been a dream come true, the chance to watch one of his heroes perform night after night. But Kurt's decision was final, and the band stood behind their frontman's vision of what Nirvana should and shouldn't do. Now, let's talk about another band Nirvana refused to tour with for the same reason: Skid Row. In 1991, hair metal was fading, but Skid Row was still on top with Slave to the Grind. The New Jersey band had just made history as the first heavy metal album to debut at #1, selling 134,000 copies in its first week. They wanted the hottest new band in America to join their tour, but Nirvana had other plans. By 1991, Skid Row was no small-time operation. They had already proven themselves as major players, notably opening for Guns N' Roses during the North American leg of the Use Your Illusion tour, with anthems like 18 and Life and Youth Gone Wild dominating MTV. Skid Row was selling out arenas across the country, seemingly a perfect match for Nirvana's growing popularity. The timing also seemed perfect. Nevermind had just exploded onto the scene, and everyone wanted a piece of Kurt Cobain's magic. For most bands, the chance to tour with a chart-topping act like Skid Row would have been a dream opportunity. Massive crowds, guaranteed exposure, and a chance to convert hair metal fans to the grunge cause. However, Cobain placed Skid Row in the same category as the other major bands he had already turned down. In a 1991 interview, he confirmed that many groups had asked Nirvana to tour, specifically naming Rush and Skid Row, but reiterated that he wasn't interested in joining any of them. Kurt made it clear that Nirvana didn't want to play huge arenas as a support act. It wasn't a knock on Skid Row's music. It was about staying true to Nirvana's vision for how they would grow. What makes this story even more fascinating is that Cobain and his bandmates had briefly used the name Skid Row themselves before settling on Nirvana. As Dave Grohl later revealed in a tweet, they changed it simply because it wasn't appealing enough. So, when the famous Skid Row came calling, Kurt was, in a strange way, rejecting a name his own band had once used. It was like turning down an alternate reality version of themselves. At #1 is the biggest offer Nirvana ever rejected, the headlining spot at Lollapalooza in 1994. More than just another tour, this decision became Kurt Cobain's final, tragic stand against the commercialization of his music and his own fame. By early 1994, Lollapalooza was the undisputed king of alternative festivals. Perry Farrell's creation had evolved from a simple farewell tour into a generation-defining cultural event. For that year's headliner, organizers had only one name at the top of their list: Nirvana, the band that had rewritten the rules of the music industry. The offer was staggering, reportedly between $1,000, $8, and $10 million. It was life-changing money, enough to secure the band's financial future. The proposed lineup was a dream for alternative rock fans, set to feature the Smashing Pumpkins, Beastie Boys, and the Breeders. On paper, it was the ultimate platform for the genre. The festival's booker, John Rubelli, understood the magnitude of the moment. His passion for securing the band was palpable when he later spoke to People magazine about it. "Nirvana was everything to us," he said. "When you're alongside something that's once in a generation, it just fulfills you in every way." The pressure on Cobain was immense. His management, his bandmates, and even his wife, Courtney Love, were all reportedly pushing him to accept the deal. In February 1994, Kurt even stated on camera that Nirvana would play the festival. However, according to multiple sources, he never truly wanted to do it and had not signed any contracts. His reluctance was deeply personal. According to Rubelli, Cobain was terrified of selling out, and Lola was a sellout moment, I think, for them. Rubely recalled Cobain expressing a profound disconnect with large audiences, saying that when he looked out at a festival crowd, he saw all of the people that were beating him up in school. On April 6, 1994, Nirvana officially withdrew from Lollapalooza. The public reason cited doctors' concerns about Kurt Cobain's health. Following his attempt in Rome the previous month, Mark Geiger, a promoter involved with the festival, confirmed the commitment had been serious, stating that while nothing was in writing, they were totally committed, and we were working on finishing up the contracts. Just 2 days later, on April the 8th, 1994, Kurt Cobain was found dead at his Seattle home. The Lollapalooza rejection thus became one of his final public acts, the ultimate expression of his artistic principles. Even with millions on the table and immense pressure from those closest to him, he chose to protect his vision of what Nirvana should represent. It was a decision that may have cost him financially, but in his eyes, it preserved the integrity he valued above all else. His final rejection cemented his legacy as grunge's reluctant spokesperson, one who chose authenticity over the biggest payday of his career. So that's the story. 6 huge offers from 6 legendary names, and 6 times Nirvana said no. From the big, flashy world of Guns N' Roses to the complex, precise world of Rush, and even the culture-shaping powerhouse that was Lollapalooza, Nirvana turned each one down. On the surface, these decisions might seem confusing, even self-destructive. They turned down fame, fortune, and the chance to share the stage with giants. But, as we've seen, for Kurt Cobain, it was never about the size of the stage. It was about the integrity of the message. Each no was a deliberate choice, a line drawn in the sand against the corporate rock machine he felt was swallowing music whole. These weren't just business decisions, they were declarations of independence. Cobain's refusal to tour with these bands was rooted in a fierce, almost painful commitment to his principles. He rejected the excess of hair metal, the impersonal nature of stadium arenas, and ultimately, the crushing weight of becoming a commercial product. In the end, Nirvana's story is defined as much by the stages they refused to play as by the ones they conquered. These rejections cemented Kurt Cobain's legacy not just as a brilliant musician, but as a reluctant icon who fought to protect his art from the very industry that built him up. He consistently chose authenticity over applause, and that is a decision that continues to resonate with music fans to this day. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments which of these stories surprised you the most.